This isn't a normal piano. This piano is actually capable of learning my style and responds to what I play. By using something called a Markov chain, this piano is able to pick out features from what I play and create something new entirely on its own. And this isn't the only way to do this either. Other techniques ranging from using simple stochastic distributions all the way to creating entire machine learning models have also been used for similar purposes, all of which fall under the umbrella term known as algorithmic composition. But before we can even try to understand how any of these techniques work, we first need to learn what algorithmic composition even means. In 1792, Mozart published a very peculiar piece of music. At first glance, this composition seems no different than any of his other compositions, except for one small detail. What you're looking at isn't actually the score, at least not the final score. Before playing the piece, the performer is asked to roll 2 dice, which would yield a sum between 2 and 12 inclusive. Then, with the provided lookup table, the performer would find the appropriate cell, where the rows represent the sum of the 2 dice and the columns represent the measure number. The performer would then go back to the score and find the bar associated with the number in the cell. This technique would then be repeated for every measure until the end of the piece. Given that there are 11 different possibilities when rolling 2 dice, if our final piece had, say, only 6 measures, this would yield a total of 11 to the power of 6 unique possibilities, or nearly 1.8 million combinations, all of which are technically different compositions. But despite this large number, not every measure has the same likelihood of being selected. Rolling a 6 is much more likely than rolling a 12, since there are 5 different ways to roll a sum of 6, while there's only one way to roll a sum of 12. Although Mozart's composition is the best known example of using dice to randomly generate music from pre-composed selections, it's certainly not the first. Earlier examples include the ever-ready Minuet and Polonaise Composer by Johann Kernberger, and a method for making 6 bars of double counterpoint at the octave without knowing the rules by C.P.E. Bach. And of course, rolling dice wasn't the only way to randomly generate music either. Some composers used playing cards, while others merely asked the performer to think of a random number. But what ties all of these compositions together is the idea of reducing human intervention when writing music. By delegating certain aspects to randomness, the resulting composition is no longer purely written by the composer themselves. Instead, processes are used to aid the completion of the piece, and these processes are called algorithms. This idea of using algorithms to generate some, or even all aspects of a piece is known as algorithmic composition. But this still doesn't answer our original question. How exactly did the piano at the start of this video manage to respond to my playing style? After all, we saw that rolling 2 dice to create just 6 bars of music yielded nearly 1.8 million unique possibilities. So surely we didn't just rely on randomness. Let's consider a simple melody, the first 7 notes of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Since we're in the key of C major, we should only be selecting notes from a C major scale. And if we wrap our C major scale into a list, we can create a simple algorithm that randomly draws from this list with equal probability. Given that our melody is 7 notes long and that there are 7 notes in our scale, the probability of obtaining the original Twinkle Twinkle Little Star melody is 1 over 7 to the power of 7, or approximately 1 in 800,000. The result could sound like this, or this, or even this. I don't know about you, but this doesn't really seem like a continuation of the original melody, does it? A first improvement we can do is, instead of wrapping the entire C major scale within the list of notes to choose from, we only include the notes C, G, and A, which are the only 3 notes our melody uses anyways. Now, the probability of each note being drawn is 1 over 3. So the probability of obtaining the original melody is 1 over 3 to the power of 7, or approximately 1 in 2,000. The resulting melody could then sound like this, or this, which is definitely an improvement over our first algorithm. But we can still do a lot better. So far, our algorithm is only looking at which notes exist in the melody. So if we instead used another melody that also consists of only the notes C, G, and A, like this one, our algorithms would be exactly identical. What if our algorithm could look at not only what notes exist in the melody, but also which note came before? Consider flipping a fair coin. The probability of getting heads is 1 out of 2, and so is the probability of getting tails. Since the coin has 2 different states, either heads or tails, we can draw 2 circles to represent them. Let's say we've just flipped the coin and it landed on heads. We know that the probability of getting heads again on the next flip is 0.5. So we draw an arrow pointing from this state to itself and give it a value of 0.5. We also know that the probability of getting tails on the next flip is also 0.5. So we draw another arrow pointing from this state to the other state and give it a value of 0.5. And similar arrows can be drawn for the tails state as well. These arrows are called transition probabilities, and this model is called a Markov chain. Now let's go back to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. We first draw the 3 states representing the 3 different notes in our melody. If we're currently on C, we can either stay on C or move to G. Since these are the only 2 possibilities, we give each of them a probability of 0.5. Similarly, if we're currently on A, we can either stay on A or move to G, both of which also have an equal probability of occurring. And the same thing can be said for G, which can either stay on itself or move to A. The remaining transition probabilities are then all set to 0, and each note is given an equal probability of being the first note. Now, the probability of obtaining the original melody is 1 over 3 times 1 over 2 to the power of 6, or 1 in 192. The resulting melody could then sound like this, or this. And this is the underlying algorithm of the piano you heard at the start of this video. By taking in the first 9 notes of Amazing Grace as the input melody, the piano builds an internal Markov chain that it then uses to create a response. For example, the note F is followed by either an A or a D. Since there are 2 instances in the melody where an F leads into an A and only 1 instance where an F leads into a D, the probability of having A come after F is 2 over 3. While the probability of having D come after F is only 1 over 3. Once the Markov chain is fully constructed, the piano can then generate a new melody in the same style. So far, we've only looked at ways at selecting pitch, but what about rhythm? Well, the same techniques could also be applied for selecting note durations. For instance, we could create one Markov chain for selecting the pitch of every note and another one for selecting the duration. As a side note, Markov chains have many applications outside of just music. Instead of just predicting the next note in a melody, they can also be used to predict the next word in a sentence, which is actually the underlying algorithm for how your phone is able to predict the next word in your texts. If you're still watching up to this point, you may be asking yourself, what are other compositional algorithms that we can use? And the answer is simply a lot. In Mozart's composition from earlier in this video, where the performer rolls 2 dice, we observed that the probabilities of obtaining various different measures were not all equal. For instance, there's a higher likelihood of rolling a 5 than a 2, since there are 4 ways of rolling a 5, but only 1 way of rolling a 2. So what if we could purposely bias our probability distribution so that some notes are more likely to be picked over others in order to make the resulting melodies sound more cohesive? Generally speaking, melodies are mostly made up of small intervals and typically tend to avoid large jumps. So what if our algorithm could favor selecting small intervals over large ones? One simple way of modeling this is by using a negative exponential distribution, where the x-axis represents the interval size in semitones and the y-axis represents the probability of selecting that interval. Then, after arbitrarily choosing a first note, the resulting melody could sound something like this. But this still doesn't really sound that cohesive. Although we've biased our algorithm to favor small intervals over large ones, not all small intervals are consonant. For instance, minor seconds are not commonly used, and tritones are almost never used. On the other hand, major seconds, thirds, and even octaves are used quite extensively. So in order to reflect these changes, we can modify our negative exponential distribution by lowering the chances of drawing undesirable intervals in favor of more consonant ones. Now, the resulting melody could sound something like this. Another interesting algorithm is called the random walk, a stochastic process that creates a path consisting of successive random steps, where each step size in both the horizontal and vertical directions is dictated by some probability distribution. For the purposes of writing music, the x-axis can represent pitch, while the y-axis represents duration. And of course, these are just some of the many algorithms a composer can choose from when writing music. But does any of this even matter at the end of the day? Do people even enjoy algorithmic composition? Well, if you ask Reddit, the answer is yes. From my own personal experience, algorithmic composition is best used as a tool for developing new ideas that I may not have discovered on my own. As we've heard from the examples shown throughout this video, not every product of every algorithm will be an idea worth developing. But if running an algorithm 1,000 times over can create even just one melody that you actually like, then that can act as a springboard for your next composition. In today's world, it can be tempting to just let AI do all of the work. With apps like Suno that allow you to generate entire songs in mere seconds with nothing more than a simple text entry, many are left wondering if being a musician is even worth it anymore. But music isn't just about the end result. It's also about the process. While algorithmic composition relies heavily on computers, just like AI, at least it still gives total control to the human composer. In a world where it's getting harder and harder to not turn to AI, creating algorithms to write music may actually feel refreshing and even human.